So okay, we start now. I have 40 minutes, so we're going to go through 4 pieces of the presentation that I think are all relevant to certainly what you folks do together. I'll start with the website. Department information under Laurentian, under academic programs, under undergraduate programs here, because it is a little buried. I do want to say that to be able to get to it. Under undergraduate programs, the architecture school is under the faculty of professional schools, and that's something that you certainly wouldn't divine as a student. And then under the faculty of professional schools, architecture then has its own box that takes us to this link, and there's a summary, an overview, a summary, which is very similar text to the view book that's in front of you, so I won't go through that. But certainly for the text, it's www.laurentian.ca, content, program, architecture, overview. So we can come back to that at the end. The link is also in the view book. So that's one. So at least now we have proper information as a new program starting. So September 2013, you know, is our first class, first program, inaugural startup. And so now is our first real recruiting efforts on all fronts. The second part that I'll show you for now is this webisode. So Chris Elliott, the man behind you filming, he had started 5 years ago with the community, and they did a webisode on what an architecture vision might be when the community was thinking about it. They talked to architects that are famous like Douglas Cardinal in Ottawa. They were testing and talking to people in the architecture community and the Sudbury community about what a design education might be. So that was webisode 1. They're on our site. It's 5 minutes. Webisode 2 is the one I think that's pertinent to today. It's really about what is an architectural education, and the architectural education usually takes place in the culture of the studio. That's what this building will be, with 140 students for the first 2 years. We'll have desks in here and be set up, and that's the creative workspace. So it's an atelier, and the atelier is, I say, definitely where art and technical things meet, and so students work on this creative process that we call design studio. It's usually the biggest amount of course credit per term and in the entire program, and it's a very good video to kind of give a feeling, a flavor of what architectural education is from different people's perspectives. So I thought we'd watch that. It's 5 minutes, and then I'll come back and talk about the view book and the curriculum that we have to date and do a fly-through model of the facility. So please.
If you're interested in ideas and you're interested in learning and always learning.
Ben, pour devenir un architecte, je pense que la première chose, c'est d'abord et avant tout être intéressé par tout.
Often you find people that succeed in architecture school have this kind of curiosity. And that leads to them asking questions, and that leads to innovation, and then that leads ultimately to design.
C'est participer, dans le fond, à une échelle mondiale, à une échelle culturelle, sociologique. C'est participer à la vie.
The necessity for schools of architecture is this abstract venue for creative processes that's going to fuel the rest of your career.
C'est l'aspect de conception, création qui caractérise vraiment les études en architecture.
For a lot of people, it's a process of unlearning your normal way of seeing the world.
In a school of architecture, you're constantly challenged.
It's a place of pure creativity that I don't know of another place like it.
It's really about engaging the past, the present, and what you really want to see happen in the future.
Design thinking is not so much a linear process, but iterative. It looks at a problem from all angles and participates in that problem.
À la fois, c'est être pris dans un projet, mais à la fois, c'est aussi être capable de regarder d'un point de vue de Dieu.
It's this bridge between the classroom and the real world of practice.
Donc cette espèce de travail d'exploration, d'aller-retour est caractéristique de la démarche architecturale.
Really what you're being asked to be is creative. And that means that there are really no boundaries. The boundaries are set up by kind of your ability to kind of deal with the currency of ideas.
L'atelier dans une école d'architecture, je crois que c'est fondamentalement le cœur de l'école.
It's your lifeline. It's everything that you've created and everything you want to create. You've suddenly realized that you're starting to do what you've always dreamed you thought you could do.
Studio is fun, it's engaging, and it's 24/7.
The studio is the spine of a curriculum. It's like the kitchen in a house. The studio is really the hearth. It's the place where people gather. It's the place where ideas are investigated.
Ça devient notre maison, en fait. C'est plus que notre école, ça devient notre chez-soi.
It's putting pencil to paper and, getting your hands dirty in the problem.
It's messy, it's gritty, it's textured, it's lively.
Studio is a place where you begin to understand there's a world of architecture out there that you haven't seen or discovered, and it's the place where you're discovering it every day, all the time.
The school itself holds the capacity for change, and that's when the opportunities start happening.
It's a matter of quality, integrity of the student work becoming a new bar for the community to rise to.
And the students, they become this currency, this value-added culture to the city.
The stronger that we draw upon issues in the community and work with people, that design work will be more creative, more grounded, and ultimately you can give something back to the community and they'll be constantly fueling the school.
Dans le fond, c'est un moment assez intéressant et fascinant pour tous ceux qui sont impliqués dans l'enseignement de l'architecture.
Teaching people to learn how to think and to think about creativity, that's the great thing about an architectural education. So, I think it captures the feeling. Having taught in architecture schools for 20 years, Chris really managed to film University of Waterloo, University of Montreal largely are the two schools there, but you heard from students to young graduates to Levitt Goodman architects who are working on the design here. It does capture, I think, the essential idea that, as we say, the studio is kind of the creative center. And as I said, some schools, still have a different variety of where they choose students from. So it may be more science. Let's say at Ryerson, it's still architectural science, and that's still their bent. And in a new school, there's a chance to kind of think about where we want to draw students from. And the position that we've developed, and that's what we'll talk about next in the view book. If you could go to page 99 in the view book, I'll take us through the admission requirements. Because we really wanted to draw people, as I say, from an arts and a science background, and not just feel that they're locked into one route or another. So on page 99, under professional schools, it's red, the red color in the color coding. Following up on this morning's discussion, it's also important to know now that architecture programs are all, in Canada, they're all a version of 4+2. So it's a 4-year undergraduate degree and a 2-year graduate degree. And together, that 6-year degree, the Masters of Architecture now, that's the terminal degree to go into the profession. So if you did a Bachelor of Architectural Studies here in 4 years, you're not able to go in and become an architect. It's in all schools now. It used to be there were bachelor's programs, you may remember. I started in a bachelor's program in Toronto. The first one to convert was back in 1987 in Halifax, Technical University of Nova Scotia, and I graduated from there. But the last one to convert was McGill back 4 or 5 years ago. So now all schools, so we cast it this way. It's a 4-year Bachelor of Architectural Studies, a 2-year graduate to master's, and then that's the degree that you would then do an internship after that for 2 years in an office, and then you'd be writing exams. So that's the entire process now we call those the 3 E's. Education, the experience is the internship after graduation, and the exam. So that's the route to become a licensed architect. So that's important. And I think now that all the schools have a master's as the end degree, there's more mobility. So this is something that's come up in the past 3 or 4 years. Before, you couldn't go from Waterloo, which had a 6-year bachelor's program, into Dalhousie or Tons, which had a 4-year, 3-semester-a-year project. So they were apples and oranges. But now you could technically do this degree in 4 years and then go to Waterloo for your master's, or you may do McGill's 4-year degree and then come here for your master's. That's the mobility aspect of it. But I think the essential thing is to still say it's really a 6-year program. So the way to see the professional program is as a whole. Students may take time off in between. As I say, they may leave, but certainly I've always encouraged students to stay in the program they're in because it's really not, the 4-year is not an end, it's really the 6-year. And in a design program where your thesis, your final year, will be a thesis, it's a chance to bring together everything you learned in the previous program. And if you're changing schools, of course, there's some newness in that variety, but there's also hard to have continuity. So that's just a kind of side note. But that's why the 4-year undergraduate program now, in taking students from high school or mature students, if I start with these admission requirements, it's 1 English or French, 2 maths or mathematics, and that's what I mentioned. You remember it used to be calculus and relations and functions only, and if you didn't have those, you had to get them before you came into the school. We're not stipulating that. So 2 maths, depending on what school they're in. 3 other courses, that's important too. The 3 other courses in arts or in science, and already I thought this was clear, but many people have asked, can that be a mix? Do you mean 3 in art or 3 in science? But 3 other courses in arts or science mean you could do 3 science, 2 science and 1 art, vice versa. So we didn't stipulate again. We want to try and draw in a general way. And that's a message that came through in the film. If architecture is I think people like Lewis Mumford said it best, that an architect was always a generalist. You need to know a bit about engineering, but you're not an engineer. You need to know a bit about climate change, and increasingly so, but you're not a climate change scientist. You need to know a bit about composition and art, but you're not necessarily a fine artist. But that's the thing to draw upon, that if students in your high schools are showing certainly a propensity for art and fine art, I would say that's always an option to draw them towards there. If they love building things with their uncles or friends, or grew up taking barns apart, that may get them excited about carpentry. And if they have a propensity for sciences, ideally, they come from a wide range, but I think you want to draw and guide students to be able to say, if you feel like fine art is it's not just necessarily becoming a fine artist. Architecture is a fine art, as well as a science, as well as many other things. So that's why we've cast that net fairly open. Minimum average of 75% for the same reason. We could have said, as other schools do, 85. You heard this morning, discussions about GPAs. But we set it there on purpose with an asterisk to say the 75 is still one benchmark, but it's not the full benchmark in terms of the application, because the next 3 items are really what distinguish architecture from other disciplines. You submit a portfolio. With that portfolio, we're asking for 2 letters of reference from teachers, obviously, counselors, employers, community leaders. Students often do volunteer work and want to write about that in terms of why they're, say, dedicated to the social aspect of society, and architecture is part of that. So the portfolio is a creative piece where they put together their creative work, but it also has this reference, and then most importantly, in a way, the most important thing is this 1 to 2 page statement of interest. That should be as personal as possible. So if someone says, I traveled with my family and I went to see Paris and Rome and Venice, that doesn't mean much. But if they say, I went on 1 trip and I saw this one thing and I fell in love with it, you'd want them to try to explain from a personal side what that is. So every 3rd application I've ever read said, I played with Lego in my basement and that's why I want to be an architect. So we brought Lego to the last open house and people did play with it. So that's common on the male side. On the general side, I think that people often, if you do dance, these are things that you may not think about, but if you do dance, if you do music, there was a band in Nova Scotia that had done 3 award-winning CDs. The guy didn't put any of that in his portfolio. Went home and thought he had to learn AutoCAD on a weekend and draw his kitchen. Didn't get in the program, right, the portfolio, but he thought architects mean I have to go home and draw my kitchen or my bedroom or go out and draw a house. If it's the first time you ever do that, it's no way that's going to show his creative spark as much as one of his CDs. And then when we looked at the CD, he did the graphic artwork, designed the package, played in the songs, did the editing. Next year he submitted those and he sailed through, right? Any committee looking at it would have been impressed by that work. But even he, and obviously people that guided him, didn't say that music, but training was part of making a portfolio. But we heard this morning, right, in medical school, they do that for the same reason. NOSM is wanting to draw people from a broad range and not just be blinkered by the time they're in grade 12. So I share that view. So we want that to be open, and then the creative part, that's always the most difficult thing to describe, how to make a portfolio. So we've gone a little further than I certainly have gone in the past by making this sheet that you all have now, which are conditions, admission requirements, and guidelines for preparing a portfolio. But we're going to go beyond that and make another webisode with Chris and Kate. We're going to actually show an assembly of a couple of portfolios, which I know another school that's done that and put it online. But we're trying to be as explicit as possible about the portfolio component. So for instance, these say some fairly banal things that you would take students through anyway, to make sure that the 3 items are put together the first bulletin sent to our office downtown. Laurentian will take transcripts, we'll take portfolios. Portfolio should be designed as a whole package. So again, often people took really nice work and just threw it in a bag. No labels, no titles, doesn't say if they did the work or if they took it from a magazine. So most of that is really to spell out to younger people how to make it clear and labeled, and therefore it gets looked at properly. I think the part that's for us is really this longer bullet here, which says it shouldn't exceed more than 20 individual pieces, and it should include art if you draw well, or paint, or take photographs, or have an art course, or yesterday people asked about a portfolio course, some schools even have. Any of that certainly is preparation ground. Music samples I just mentioned, or dance. Any industrial design, product design, graphic design. Sometimes people have hobbies on the side that they think is a hobby, but it actually produces work that would be relevant. Furniture making or crafts, we put Lego in. Any model building, you know, I've seen people build popsicle stick models of their cottages and toothpicks that are, the whole model fits in the palm of your hand. Writing samples, again, including poetry, essays, novels, or criticism. So writing is creative. Again, people think architecture has to be visual. It is ultimately, but not for the application. Drafting or perspective of architectural drawing that you've done. But there, we did write in, don't rush in trying to do that drawing of your kitchen on January 30th for your portfolio, because that often just doesn't get the message across. So the portfolio should show your best creative work, whether it's visual, acoustic, or any other. Multimedia, increasingly these days, videos, websites. We say hard copies if possible, but of course more and more portfolios are electronic, and that's completely fine. It's nice to see originals if it's something like a painting or a drawing, because the original usually still reads better than the scan, the size of it and so on. But electronic, if it's fully electronic, that's also fine. So we really say, make sure it's clear and concise, but when you say to someone it has to show creative spark, that's still quite nebulous. So we're going to make this video show examples of portfolios that are well done and well presented, and that'll be hopefully another help. That should be done, I would hope, in a couple of weeks. I would say by early December, certainly by the 10th of December, we should have something up online on our website attached that you can point students to. And they have until February 1st. That's the other important thing. So application is ongoing from now through, but February 1st is a reasonable portfolio deadline. Then we're hoping to get those portfolios reviewed and get answers back to students starting around March 15th, if we can stay a six-week window. So those, I think, are the important things. First-year courses, the right-hand side of this, the page 99, is now, I'll show you, this is history. Maybe we'll go to that, Kate. Can we go to that? I think it's better to show you the curriculum draft as a whole, because I mentioned when people come in, the first 3 years, really the important thing are these turquoise boxes are electives. So students still need to have a general education as part of their architectural education, 40% according to the accreditation board. So we have 2 electives each term, 1 elective in second year each term, and 1 elective in third year. And that's an example where people will take things on campus. So again, if you're a Francophone student, you may take French literature or French cultural history on the campus, so electives will be in French. If you're a French student in this studio, every term, the studio with 70 students, we're aiming for a class of 70 in each year of the 4 years. So that's 280 students undergrad, and then 60 students in the graduate program for 2 years, so that's another 120. So with 400 students, they'll be being able to move through by taking electives and take one piece of the studio in French. So with a class of 70, we'll be sitting in here in half this building next September. Class of 70 would break into 5 groups of 14. That's fairly typical. So we're aiming to have one group of 14 be Francophone, and they'll take the same studio projects, but they'll be able to have the instruction and the critiques and the discussion in French. That's the idea, not to silo and go off in another direction. So for instance, in first year, we are planning to, next fall, have people start to design and draw an ice fishing hut, and then build it in the early January of the second term here, because the studio is about place, and then bring the ice fishing huts from here out on pickup trucks, out onto Lake Ramsey, have them all be configured on the lake next to the real ice fishermen, photograph it from the 11th floor of Laurentian, and then auction them off at the end of that session, and then save that money, and then hopefully be able to build them again the following year. So that's an important point, because the whole program on the unique features here, the middle column, is really the things now that aren't in every other curriculum. Practical application through Design Studio. So that's what I mean. Every term for the 6 years will be building in communities in some way or other. So that ice fishing hut's a modest way. By the time they get to third year, in a studio which is called Northern Building. So it ramps up from place to landscape to Northern Building. So landscape, for instance, Rotary Park has offered us to be able to start to build projects in there. So communities will invite us to do things. We may do a medicine garden in a third-year studio with First Nations group at Serpent River, for instance. These are the kind of relationships that will develop and are already starting. So we'll be able to build things with students in a practical way right through the program. Second bullet is that ongoing design build and community design. So it's really, this is the emphasis in this program, not just in one term, but throughout. Inclusion of individual cultural backgrounds. So as I say, in a French student, you can move through, it's not 50-50, but it's like 80%. In that first year, if you were Francophone, you do your studio in French, your electives in French. This is the one course that term that may not be offered in French, and we're okay with that. It's been approved by Senate and so on. We really want a First Nations, French, and English speaking and everybody else group moving through the same curriculum, but with a way that emphasizes and celebrates the particular cultures. So that's really how the program has been cast. And then the yellow boxes means it's a co-op program, so co-op work placements for pay. And so being a new program, either the first summer or the second summer, you'll do half the class will go on work term. So you get one 13-week work term in the first 2 years, an office experience in the third year, and then at graduate level, 2 terms together. So you get 8 months together, which is long enough to go to an office, travel somewhere further afield, and even participate in getting things built. 8 months is actually decent, and both Waterloo and Dalhousie, they're the 2 co-op programs in the country in architecture, they both have this 8 month together. So some of those things aren't new, but the configuration of being able to actually highlight what it's like to move through a program rather than being English or French, right? So, you know, McGill, you would study in English fully, University of Montreal fully in French. Here, there's the capacity to move through in a way that is more seamless and yet more particular. And the First Nations access here to elder in residence. Laurentian has 2 elders in residence that I know, a third who I'm just getting to know, and now the idea is to hire a 4th elder, and then they'd rotate. So twice, if they each came, say, for half a day, we'd have 2 days a week in this building where elders in residence are there for counseling and talking about First Nations worldview, but also it's for everybody. So again, it's not that they're there just for the First Nations people. It's so if I could go as a first-year student and talk about colors and cardinal points and living lightly on the land, this is part of the entire teaching of the whole program. And then the new building, we said spaces and rooms that'll be, I'll show you that in a minute. We have a round room for Aboriginal classroom as well as ceremonial space, but it's not tucked away in a basement. It's actually celebrated and hung, so you'll see it from Elm Street when you're walking along. And other aspects, Aboriginal art. We're hoping to run a competition for young Aboriginal artists and do 4 or 5 art installations in the building. So it really starts to weave the community again into the building. Then 26 weeks of practical co-op in the undergraduate and 26 weeks in the graduate. And then the 4 buildings that I'll talk about in a minute. And as I say, enrollment's limited to 70 students. That's what we're aiming for. So it's ambitious, and I think the unique things as we talk about it more and more and develop it from the original community vision 5 years ago to actually implementing it now. When we get through here, I think the themes will always kind of talk about Sudbury and its location and the geography, and this is the origin of the rail town right behind you, too, with the track crossing the Trans-Canada. Landscape issues, northern building, bringing it all together in comprehensive design, and then in graduate level, 2 years after this foundation, you really start to then pick where you want to specialize, craft or community. So you'll pick a path that'll probably lead you then to where you go to work and lead you back into a final thesis design year. And then in terms of the building, we're in this building for the first 2 years, as Dominic said, here in the Telegraph building. And then when the new L-shaped building is built, we'll all move into there, and this space will become our facility for workshops. So we'll have fantastic workshops. When this is wood shops, big garage doors, digital equipment, digital shops, metal shop, a wet shop for doing things like rammed earth and plaster and so on. So this will really become the atelier workshops, and the studio space then will be in the 4-story building on Elm. So that's our plan. So again, we're not demolishing anything, spread the word. And as I said earlier, this teaching tool, having the building and being able to teach timber structures course, when you're teaching this course on structures, it's called wood, and you're in this space, you get a chance to not say, let's just run to the library and look something up, or go to see another building. You can talk about it here. And our 4th building, which is going to be cross-laminated timber, it's the piece between here and the track. That's a solid wood construction. It's the first building of its kind in Ontario, and we'll be able to say to a student, here's how they did a building in 1906, and here's a building 100 years later in solid laminated wood that you cut out with CNC machines. So the building, and that class, it'll be experimental, but I think the building is the first teaching tool, and we've been talking about it a lot that way. So now I'll show you the fly-through model. And then we thought yesterday with Patrick we'd kind of do a walk around, but you all know we're in this building here, Farmers Market, Telegraph Building, Fromagerie across the road, Elgin here, Elm. So the idea is to have a 4-story building on Elm, a 2-story building in this cross-laminated timber, a green roof on top of that. This is the library and the lecture hall, and this is 50 feet. We have to be back 15 meters from the train track, so that's going to be a linear park. So this is going to be part of the Elgin Greenway. The city is doing a master plan, as you know, that's carrying on the park, so they want to bring it up Elgin, and this will continue into that. So for that 50 feet, people will constantly be walking or cycling through here and seeing the activities of the school. So we're going to be very much on display, purposely. So let's do a fly-through. You start as a bird in this video before you go lower, so unlike Santa, or maybe like the real Santa, you start high, come around. We should not have a helipad, but we may put a Santa sleigh pad. Patrick, make a note on top, because it's an important place for the parade. So you come around Elm Street, large building, right, that'll fill the empty space there now, and then come under an overhang along that 15-meter parkway for everybody. There's the round room that you get to see from outside, the Aboriginal space. Then you can come into this room as an atrium into the building, or keep going. That's the wood building with a library balcony. And then into the courtyard between the market, just to the west of us. It's going to have a new skin. See, this building's uninsulated, so we have to insulate it from the outside, which means taking off the old skin, and the gray is a new skin. And then we'll form a courtyard by the 4 buildings with a loading dock and that little beak that you see here. People hate this beak, but I like it. And then that's the side on Elgin. This is a big transformer that's owned by the city, so we're turning that into a sign. And then this is the cleaned up, fixed up, without the Casa Mexicana signs, restaurant, but the bridge that connects the 2 buildings pops through on this side as a glass that says architecture, so you know that's the front door on the other street. And coming through here, our real address will of course be Elm Street, so we come into a front door. This is where all the action will be, the students presenting their work, underside of the round room, administration, and all the public floor where we're hoping community groups can do poetry readings and play jazz, and then going upstairs to the studio space. All this wall on the right is facing south, so we're facing that way, and we have great solar gain coming. We're in a perfect orientation in this site, so we get sisters' gardens, medicine garden, and then ultimately a green roof. So that took us to the studio space. So that was kind of 4 snapshots of the 4 different aspects of it. Any thoughts or questions? Comments? Pardon? Oh, good. It's been an effort by a lot of people for a long time, and as I say, Kate's been here the whole 5 years, quietly plugging away. Tina's the last one that's joined us from the development office at Laurentian, but we owe a lot to a lot of people that did the thinking, and it's, as I say, I'm very excited about being able to take those ideas and now implement them into the start of the program. Do you have any students? I'm in my side, I didn't ask this yesterday. Do you have anybody that you know of in your schools that are interested in a career in architecture or design?
I have one, but she's only grade 11 right now. That's good.
Yeah. At the Ontario University Fair, many people came in grade 11 and talked about it, which is a good sign. Ultimately, you want to spread the word as early as we can. But I guess the other caveat when I just said that, it may not, the 4-year degree is still useful to know that you could do a Bachelor of Architectural Studies and then not become an architect. That's equally important to say. It's a professional program, but the kind of design education that the video brought out, that's important too, right? So more and more people now are doing like that earlier degree, Bachelor of Environmental Studies. You may go into planning, right? You may go and work at City Hall. That's a positive thing from where we sit as educators. If you do that 4-year degree as a stepping stone to any other field, you'll have a design education, as the video showed, that will pay off. As I say, even if you worked in City Hall, having that discussion with someone about permits and things is really valuable compared to someone who doesn't have a design background. So it may not just be someone says architecture, they may be interested in design, and I would want to expand it to that, right? Or environmental design, or sustainable issues. So I'm sure, I know with young people I talk to, those issues are definitely in the foreground of a lot of their thinking, and a lot of your courses in high schools touch on some of those things. But I know in my own case, the guidance counselor, I was the only person out of my high school that ever mentioned architecture, and no one really knew what it was in my school, which has stayed with me for these decades. So when they asked me, why are you interested in architecture? I said, because of Michelangelo, and I wasn't joking. In my mind, Michelangelo was an architect. I'd had a good fine arts background, so that's who I thought was an architect, even though today he wasn't licensed and they would say he wasn't. On the other hand, he covered a lot of ground and made St. Peter's, which isn't bad. But today they would have arrested him for not having a license.
The question we often get is for portfolios. The students are asked if possible to send in originals. Do they get them back?
Yes, we did say on there, if it's stamped, it's always a question, right? Because it's another step. Mailing, if people do, a reasonable sized portfolio and it comes with a self-addressed envelope, that's the condition, we'll mail them back. And we said that very clearly. If you don't have that, and you don't have an address, it gets impossible to mail back 300-400 portfolios. Yeah, that's why schools are moving more and more to electronic because of that. You send in, and also from a student side, if you're applying to 3 or 4 schools, which as you know at the UX site they may, then which one do you send your original to? Kate and I were talking about that last week, and do you make 4 originals, which is possible, or do you make 1 and then 3 copies? And then they wonder, students asked us at the open house, where do you send the original? So we want to make that as simple as possible. Obviously, if you photograph things well, put them on a CD, this solves the issue of returning and where do you give the original? But I just know every year I see someone that does, large life drawings and they want to send in the original, and you feel that drawing differently than if you see a little JPEG of it. So we left it open.